On May 5, 1492, Columbus sighted what he proclaimed to be the fairest isle that eyes have beheld. The land of wood and water, or Jamaica, as named by the indigenous Taínos, soon became a colony of Spain, and in 1655, the Spanish yielded Jamaica to British control. The British colonial power, with a labor force of enslaved Africans, indentured Indians and Chinese, and white aristocracy, turned the country into a sugar manufacturer and banana producer to fill the coffers of the British Empire. Amidst three different nationalist projections, independence would be gained in 1962, and even today, the nation-building process continues. The coming of emancipation in 1834 charted Jamaica onto its course towards independence. It was a time riddled with conflicts between the plantocracy and colonial office over whether blacks were to be allowed greater or less political participation. Nevertheless, in the early 20th century, some Jamaicans, mostly local merchants, urban professionals, and artisans, were appointed into the councils. The operation of this crown colony system was reliant upon balancing the interests of the British governing officials with those of the Jamaican non-official members of the Legislative Council. The elected Jamaican members of this body were in the minority and hardly had any power or influence within the council. The partnership between the British and the white Jamaican upper class remained, while the vast majority of the population, who was black, remained poor and disenfranchised. This climate would give rise to the philosophies of Marcus Garvey. He began to lead a nationalist movement which he called Black Nationalism. Later in 1929, he founded Jamaica's first political party, the People's Political Party, PPP, to fulfill the mandate of black nationalism. Marcus Garvey called for Jamaicans of African descent to support the creation of a black nation by standing in racial unity. His nationalist work, however, did not end with the PPP. He also put forward a charter that disrupted the status quo and caused the elite to strongly resist his ideas. According to Tony Martin, Garvey called for the need for a black dominion status, political independence for Jamaica, and West Indies Federation. Garvey's calls came at a time when white colonies were receiving independence, and he felt that the same should be reciprocated towards black colonies. These ideas were never before espoused on such a mass scale. Garvey and the PPP, despite making some political advancements, could not successfully contest the power of the elite as they aggressively resisted his ideas. Ironically, it was those who most resisted Garveyism that led Jamaica towards self-government and independence. 1938 was marked with riots. The elite resented their limited political power while the wider population clamored for a better quality of life. Jamaicans began to develop a strong political consciousness, and direct crown rule and universal adult suffrage came shortly in 1944. The first national election was contested by 8 parties, and Sir Alexander Bustamante of the Jamaica Labour Party, JLP, became Jamaica's first premier. Beginning then, the JLP and the Norman Manley-led People's National Party, PNP, would dominate the political arena, interchanging rule according to who had better ability to mobilize the support of the black poor. Both parties differed on matters pertaining to independence. The PNP sought self-government and independence, while the JLP exclaimed to the masses that independence would mean black disenfranchisement. By 1955, both parties were now in support of independence. This shift would give Norman Manley the leverage to win the 1955 elections over Bustamante. The ruling PNP began to strengthen local government and would take Jamaica into West Indies Federation to safeguard the country's independence. The British had assured the colonies that independence would have come if they formed a collective West Indian state instead of seeking individual statehood. In 1958, Manley aligned Jamaica with 9 other territories to create the West Indies Federation. The dominant countries would be Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad and Tobago. The one state that would emerge from this federation was said to have Port-au-Prince, Trinidad, as its capital. This would cause strong feelings to emerge within the Jamaican society. Jamaicans also resented the one island, one vote policy that the West Indies Federation had adopted, especially since it was the Federation's largest country in terms of population size and land mass. As Bustamante's support of Federation changed to one of opposition, so did the Jamaican people align their views. He warned that Federation would be financially stifling for Jamaica and began a stern call for Jamaica to seek independence on its own. Though Manley preferred to stay in the Federation, he was receptive to the people's cries and called a referendum in 1961, which resulted in Jamaica's withdrawal from the West Indies Federation. This would lead Manley to call an election in 1962, which he lost to the JLP. Bustamante now held premiership and became the first prime minister when Jamaica received independence on August 6, 1962. Independence was welcomed, but Jamaicans had already spent their nationalistic zeal disputing the contentious matter of federation. Eternal Father, bless our land. In charting the course towards defining this new nation, once again, black nationalism emerged. Millard Johnson, who relaunched the PPP in 1961, was excluded from the constitutional talks for Jamaican independence. This resulted in backlash from the masses, who openly protested against the government's stance towards black nationalism. Faced with the urgent need to create the post-independence nation, and threatened by the continuous percolation of black nationalism, this defined the nation, according to the motto "Out of many one people," as a melting pot of races and cultures that lived harmoniously. The newly elected government could not support black nationalism because it threatened their white rule, and the masses in turn resented white or Creole rule. The look to Jamaican exceptionalism could mobilize the black population to continue its support of the elite, generate international appeal towards Jamaica, and stabilize a system that had a brown political elite and an emerging Chinese and Lebanese capitalist community. The assimilation process into a new Jamaican identity would be made possible with the use of cultural institutions to promote this reform. The 6 national symbols were established. The colors of the flag would symbolize gold for the country's resources, green for growth, and black to represent the country's historical struggles. A national fabric, the bandana, was also established, and music such as ska would carry this new identity forward. After independence, nation building would continuously be disrupted as leadership oscillated between the JLP and the PNP. The different ideologies, especially on foreign policy, that each party held would ultimately leave the country in economic limbo. After independence, the JLP's reign lasted until the 1970s. Norman Manley's son, Michael Manley, succeeded at the polls. This occurred after the JLP became known for its poor management, factionalism, and corruption. Manley not only won support from the lower class, but also from the middle and business classes who had become disenchanted with the JLP government. His campaign was built on the restoration of a strong sense of black identity. However, this differed from Garvey's, as the reference to blacks was now used to describe anyone who suffered under colonialization. Michael Manley's tenure would see a Jamaica that pursued a democratic socialist agenda and one that built close ties with Cuba. And so, for the first time, political divisions within Jamaica reflected the East-West conflict. Manley's populist policies sought to give political and social access to the entire Jamaican population, and simultaneously, the elite started to shift towards embracing their local Jamaican culture. On the side of the JLP opposition, Edward Seaga became its newest leader. Political rivalry continued until 1980, the bloodiest election ever, and support from the US leveraged the JLP's anti-socialist campaign, which defeated Manley. By then, Manley had widened his electoral support as well as that of a number of left-wing leaders. Economic constraints would force Manley to take a loan from the IMF, which ruined his legitimacy to the people. After Siaga was elected, there was a reverse of Manley's programs, and both capitalist investments and tourists flowed into Jamaica. This led to the popularization of dancehall instead of reggae amongst youth and the adoption of Jamaicans to American way of life. Siaga failed to grow the Jamaican economy, and in 1989, the PNP would again win another election, after shifting its style of governance more so to the right.